If Officer Rachel Monroe hadn't run out of coffee filters, Lila Carter might have disappeared forever. That's the kind of thought that crawls into your head at 3 a.m. when sleep won't come, and your canine partner is curled up at your feet, breathing heavy like he's carrying the weight of something you'll never fully understand. But that day didn't feel like a life or death kind of day. It was just a Tuesday, just a quick stop at Harrison's Hardware and Supply, until Titan growled. The morning had been uneventful. A few parking tickets, a report about a suspicious van near the school district, and a call from dispatch about a lost beagle that turned out to be hiding under a deck 2 blocks from its home. The kind of shift that didn't rattle the soul or raise your blood pressure. Rachel had been on the job for over a decade, and days like this were a blessing. Titan, her canine partner of 6 years, was technically off duty. He sat in the back of the cruiser with his nose pressed against the window, ears flicking lazily at the sound of passing traffic. He always knew when things were calm. He also knew when they weren't. Rachel parked the cruiser in front of Harrison's and grabbed her wallet. The plan was simple: get filters, maybe a snack, and get back before lunch patrol. Titan gave a soft chuff when the engine cut off, but otherwise stayed put, until the bell over the hardware store door jingled and Rachel stepped inside. That's when everything shifted. The moment Titan's paws hit the tile floor, his entire posture changed. His tail stiffened, his ears shot forward, his body lowered, muscles tightening under his golden brown coat. Rachel could feel the leash tremble before she heard it, a low, gravelly growl that came from deep in his chest. "Easy, boy," she murmured, scanning the room. Nothing seemed off. To the left, a young father browsed paint samples with a toddler tugging at his sleeve. To the right, 2 older men in work boots discussed drill bits. The cashier behind the counter chewed gum and glanced at her phone. No one screamed, no alarms, no visible threat. But Titan didn't move. He planted himself in the middle of the entryway, hackles slightly raised, eyes locked on something invisible to everyone but him. Rachel's heart rate ticked up. "Talk to me," she said under her breath. Titan's nose flared. His gaze snapped toward the rear of the store, where a narrow hallway led to employee access doors, utility closets, and a loading dock. And then he whimpered. Not loud, not dramatic, just a soft, heartbreaking sound, almost like sorrow. Rachel had seen Titan take down armed suspects, sniff out narcotics hidden in walls, and find a missing girl buried beneath a collapsed shed. But this sound, it wasn't rage, it was pain. She didn't hesitate. She unclipped her holster and pressed her mic. Unit 614 requesting silent backup to Harrison's Hardware. Code yellow. Maintain radio silence unless confirmed. Standby for access to employee hallway. K9 indicates distress. From the front of the store, nothing seemed wrong. The fluorescent lights buzzed. A fan turned lazily near the ceiling. Country music hummed from a small speaker. But Titan's focus was locked. Rachel began walking slowly toward the hallway, hand resting on the grip of her service weapon. Titan moved with her, his body low, nose working the air, tail stiff like a rod. As they turned the corner, past the employee-only sign, Titan stopped again. His snout pointed toward an unmarked gray door, scuffed, slightly warped at the bottom, the kind of door you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. Rachel tried the handle, locked. Titan let out a low growl. The door didn't appear on the store's blueprint. She knew that because she'd helped plan the department's emergency walkthroughs for small businesses just like this one. There should have been a break room and a supply closet back here, not a door with no label and no key code. Rachel reached into her belt pouch and pulled out a small multi-tool. Carefully, she inserted the pick and worked the lock. It was old, rusty, cheap. The bolt clicked. Titan surged forward, but Rachel held his harness. "Wait!" She cracked the door open slowly. The room beyond was dim, lit only by a dusty window near the ceiling. It smelled like paint thinner, rubber, and something else, something faintly sour. Old shelving units lined the walls, stacked with broken boxes, mop heads, and busted appliances. A place meant for junk. But Titan wasn't interested in the shelves. He turned his head slightly and crept toward the back corner, where 2 tall cardboard boxes leaned against the wall, taped shut but crooked, like something behind them had shifted. Rachel drew her flashlight. Her other hand stayed on the weapon. "Who's back here?" she called out, firm but not shouting. No answer. Then Titan let out another sound, a low whine song. He pawed at the floor once, then pressed his nose toward the space between the boxes and the wall. Rachel crouched and tilted her flashlight low. Behind the boxes, she saw it. A narrow gap, maybe 12 inches across. Dark, cramped. But in the beam of her flashlight, something moved. A flicker of fabric, a small shoe, then a whisper. So quiet she almost didn't catch it. "Please, don't let him know you found me." Rachel froze. It wasn't just a lost child. It wasn't a prank. This wasn't a kid playing hide and seek. This was fear. A practiced fear. "Okay," she said softly, slowly lowering her voice. "My name's Rachel. I'm with the police. You're safe now. But I need to know, are you hurt?" There was a pause. "My ankle, it's stuck." Titan stood perfectly still, eyes on the gap, not barking, not moving, like a statue carved to guard this child. Rachel clicked her mic. 614, child located, female, approximately 6 or 7, injured ankle, possibly restrained. Do not alert store employees. Send tactical team through rear dock. No lights, no sirens. Rachel holstered her weapon and took a breath. Her hands weren't shaking, but her mind was racing. Who locked a child in the back of a hardware store? And where the hell was the person who did it? She turned to check on Titan, but he was gone. The leash lay limp on the floor, harness clip open. Rachel stepped to the door and heard it, the sound of claws on tile moving fast. Then a low, furious bark, then a shout, a crash, and silence. Titan had found someone, and Rachel knew the real story had just begun. The crash echoed from the back of the store like a warning bell, metal slamming into metal, a bark that rattled the air, then silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that made your gut tighten. Officer Rachel Monroe was already moving. She radioed backup again, voice low but firm. "Canine Titan is engaged in pursuit. Rear of store. Suspect likely in employee zone. All units move silent." Then she turned back to the dark utility closet, where a little girl still hid behind stacked boxes and shadows. "You're okay," Rachel whispered, crouching down. "I'm not leaving you. I promise." The girl didn't move at first, just a trembling bundle in the dark. Her hair was tangled, and her arms were wrapped tight around a tiny pink backpack like it was armor. Rachel couldn't see her face fully, but what she could see made her chest tighten. Grime, redness around the eyes, a scratch down one cheek. Titan had found her. Titan had known. Rachel reached into her pouch for her folding blade and gently sliced the cord binding the girl's ankle to a metal fixture bolted into the floor. The knot was tight, too tight to have been done in a hurry. This had been deliberate. "Can you move, sweetheart?" The girl whimpered. "It hurts." "I know. You don't have to move yet. Help is coming." Rachel wrapped her jacket around the girl's shoulders and clicked her radio. "Child is restrained, injured but conscious. Awaiting med team rear lot access. Secure perimeter." Still crouched low, she held one hand just outside the shadows. The girl's hand finally reached back, small, hesitant, fingers clutching hers like they might vanish at any second. "What's your name?" "Lila." Rachel nodded slowly. "That's a beautiful name, Lila. I'm Rachel. And my partner, the dog, his name is Titan. He's out there making sure you're safe." Lila's voice was barely a whisper. "He didn't bark at me." "No," Rachel said gently, "he only barks at bad guys." Outside the closet, the hardware store remained eerily calm. Customers had no idea what had just happened 20 feet away. The manager, unaware of the unfolding nightmare, was still arguing with a vendor over a shipment of mulch. It was perfect cover. Too perfect. Rachel stayed with Lila until the paramedics arrived. The girl flinched at the first uniformed man who stepped through the door, so Rachel climbed into the ambulance with her, holding her hand the entire way. Titan was nowhere to be seen, but Rachel had a feeling she'd find him soon, and not with an empty mouth. Back at the store, things moved fast. 2 officers met Rachel in the ER parking lot 10 minutes later. The suspect had been apprehended. Male, mid-30s, no ID, wearing a red vest with a fake name badge that said Ron Boy, floor crew. He was found bleeding near a row of metal shelving units in the employee locker room, courtesy of one pissed-off German shepherd. "Titan tracked him like a bloodhound," Officer Kane said. "Didn't let up. Cornered him and slammed him straight into the shelf." "Good," Rachel replied, jaw clenched. "He didn't work there," Kane added. "Not officially, anyway. The manager swears up and down they've never seen him before. But some employees mentioned they thought he was new. Fake badge, familiar face, that's how they do it." Rachel shook her head. "Blend in long enough to get what they want." Kane looked uncomfortable. "It gets worse." They had recovered a dark blue sedan 2 blocks from the store. Inside, a duffel bag filled with duct tape, zip ties, candy, and a burner phone wiped clean. In the glove box, printed photos of other children, not just Lila. Jesus, Rachel muttered. She stared at the car like it might explain something. It didn't. Back at the precinct, the team was already digging into fingerprints, digital records, anything they could scrape from the suspect's burned phone. Forensics would take time. But Rachel already knew one thing for sure. This wasn't random. And Titan's growl had stopped something much bigger from happening. Later that night, Rachel sat beside Lila's hospital bed while the little girl finally slept. Titan curled on the floor like a guardian statue, eyes half-lidded, but ears twitching with every hallway noise. A nurse stepped inside and lowered her voice. She hasn't said anything about what happened yet. Only talks to the dog. Rachel smiled faintly. That's okay. Dogs are better listeners than most people. She keeps reaching for his fur while she sleeps. Feels like safety, Rachel said softly. Like home. By morning, the store's security footage had been pulled. The first few clips were uneventful. Customers buying paint, an elderly man asking about lawn fertilizer, a kid knocking over a display of screws. But at 8:41 a.m., 2 hours before Rachel ever walked in, the screen showed something else. A man in a red vest, walking beside Lila Carter. No visible struggle, no screaming, no dragging, just following. He was smiling gently, holding the door for her like a dad might. Rachel froze the footage. The girl was in her school uniform. Her backpack was zipped tight. She looked calm, but her eyes were pointed downward. No expression, just a small shadow of a kid who had already stopped asking questions. He groomed her, Rachel said aloud. What? The sergeant asked, entering the room with a coffee in hand. That man, he didn't snatch her. He convinced her to follow him. Maybe promised something. Maybe showed her a fake badge. Or maybe she was scared already. The sergeant exhaled slowly. Could have drugged her too. Some of these guys. Rachel didn't respond. Her stomach twisted. It was too familiar. The man gave his name as Mason Doyle. No priors under that ID. But when his fingerprints were run through the national database, hits came back from 3 other states, all under aliases. One match linked him to an active missing child case out of Little Rock. Another to a closed investigation in Kansas City that never resulted in charges. And now, Lila. Patterns forming, the FBI agent said when she called in that afternoon. This isn't a first-time offender, but despite the mountain of evidence, Mason Doyle hadn't said a single word since being taken into custody. No confession, no emotion, just silence. Back at the hospital, Lila stirred awake. She blinked up at Titan first, and when she saw Rachel sitting nearby, she whispered, "Did he get me out?" Rachel smiled gently. "He did. He heard you when no one else did." Lila reached a hand down and laid it on Titan's head. He licked her palm once and settled back into sleep. She didn't say anything more. Not yet. But Rachel could feel something shift, the beginning of trust. Outside, the sun was setting over Crestfield. Rachel stood near her cruiser, sipping lukewarm coffee and watching traffic crawl past the hospital. Titan stood beside her, tail swaying gently. She looked down at him. "You didn't bark for attention," she said quietly. "You barked for justice." Titan didn't answer. He didn't have to. His eyes were calm, steady, focused on the doors behind them, waiting for the next time someone needed him. And Rachel realized that next time might already be coming. Lila Carter didn't cry the way people expected her to. There were no loud sobs, no screams in the middle of the night, no breakdowns when the lights turned off, or when strangers in scrubs asked her too many questions. Instead, she stayed quiet. So quiet, the nurses at St. Luke's pediatric unit started checking her pulse twice, just to be sure. She slept, curled up on her right side, her pink backpack clutched tight against her chest. And Titan, the golden brown German shepherd who found her, curled at the foot of her bed like a living statue. And for 3 days, he was the only one she spoke to. Officer Rachel Monroe sat in the hallway outside Lila's room, her back against the wall, hands folded over her belt. She'd seen survivors of trauma before, but never someone this small, this silent. The hospital made an exception for Titan, daily access as an emotional support presence, something rarely granted. But it was clear from the start, Lila didn't just prefer Titan's company, she needed it. Every time the nurses walked in without him, her eyes would search for the dog, and her hands would grip the edges of her blanket like they were the only anchor she had. The staff started calling it Titan time. On the 4th morning, Morning, Rachel arrived with a large coffee and a breakfast sandwich that had gone cold before she remembered to eat it. Titan walked beside her without a leash, his gait slow, calm, respectful, like he knew the halls of the hospital weren't a place for barking or tugging. When they reached Lila's door, Rachel knocked gently. A soft voice came from inside. Is it him? Rachel smiled. Yeah, it's him. Titan nudged the door open with his nose and padded quietly to the foot of the bed. Lila was sitting upright, her face pale but alert. Her hair had been brushed back into a simple braid, done by a nurse who'd learned quickly not to talk too much while doing it. Titan climbed up beside her and placed his chin gently on her lap. For the first time, Lila smiled. Rachel stayed outside for a while, letting the girl have her moment. When a child psychologist named Dr. Mayer came down the hallway, Rachel stood to greet her. She's still not talking much, Rachel said, at least not to any of us. Dr. Mayer nodded. That's normal. What she's doing with Titan, that's communication too. She's told him things? Not directly, but children at her age often process trauma through symbols, drawings, stories, sometimes just sitting quietly with someone who makes them feel safe. Rachel sighed, rubbing her temple. It kills me that she feels safer with a dog than with people. It shouldn't. That dog is the reason she's alive. He gave her something we couldn't. Unconditional presence, no expectations, no pressure, just quiet loyalty. That afternoon, the nurse on shift brought in a small pack of crayons and a spiral sketchbook. Lila didn't respond at first, but when Titan nudged the sketchbook toward her with his nose, she picked it up. She drew for hours. The first picture showed a dark hallway, filled with shadows, and a little girl hiding behind boxes. In front of her, she drew Titan, ears perked, eyes glowing, his stance frozen mid-run. Above the girl's head, she wrote in shaky letters, "Please don't leave me here." Back at the Crestfield Police Department, the investigation into Mason Doyle was growing darker by the hour. Detectives had pulled his phone records, financials, and traced his burned-out social media profiles. He'd lived under at least 3 different aliases across 4 states. A storage unit registered under one of his fake names contained disguises, school schedules, and maps. But it was the map tacked to the wall inside that made even seasoned investigators go pale. Each pushpin marked a small town location: a grocery store, a playground, a school pickup zone. The pin for Harrison's Hardware was circled in red ink. Next to it, in tight handwriting, were notes. Tuesday, 8 a.m., light foot traffic, no rear cameras. Employees rotate weekly. He had been watching, planning, not just for days, for weeks, maybe longer. Rachel stared at the evidence board in the precinct's briefing room, bile rising in her throat. This isn't just predatory behavior, it's logistical. The FBI agent beside her, a woman in a dark blazer named Agent Reese, nodded grimly. This guy was building a routine, a system. This wasn't impulse, this was structure. Rachel's jaw tightened, and Lila disrupted it. No, Reese corrected. Titan disrupted it. That dog broke a cycle we didn't even know was happening. That evening, Rachel returned to the hospital. She brought Titan's favorite toy, a knotted rope that looked like it had survived a war, and a treat she kept in her pocket. Lila was already sitting cross-legged on the hospital bed, her sketchbook open. When Titan entered the room, her face lit up. She didn't say hello. She didn't need to. She simply patted the spot next to her. Rachel stayed quiet, sitting in a chair nearby. The sun cast long shadows across the floor, and the hum of the hospital monitors became a background lullaby. Then, for the first time since her rescue, Lila spoke aloud. "He didn't smile right," she said softly. Rachel looked up. "What do you mean?" "People who are nice, their eyes smile too. His didn't. His were dead." Rachel leaned in, her voice gentle. "Are you talking about the man from the store?" Lila nodded. "He told me if I made noise, no one would find me," she whispered. "That I'd be there forever." "And you didn't make noise?" She shook her head. "But Titan still heard me." She placed a hand on the dog's neck and whispered something to him, too low for Rachel to hear. 3 days later, Rachel sat in a closed-door meeting with the district attorney and the lead FBI team. The evidence against Mason Doyle was overwhelming, but something was still missing. A confession would be ideal, the DA said, flipping through files. But he's stonewalling, and the girl's testimony, while powerful, is going to be legally delicate because of her age. "So what do we do?" Rachel asked. "We need more," Agent Reese replied. "Another victim, someone he spoke to, a trail we missed." Rachel stayed silent for a long time. Then she reached into her messenger bag and pulled out a sheet of paper. "I wrote something," she said. What kind of something? The DA asked. Not a report, a letter, a story, about Titan, about the day we found Lila. I sent it to a friend at the Crestfield Chronicle that they're going to run it tomorrow, front page. You're going public? I'm not naming names. I'm not compromising the case. But I'm hoping someone out there reads it and recognizes the pattern. Maybe they'll say, that sounds familiar. I saw a guy like that once. I thought my kid was safe. She paused. I'm hoping someone remembers what they didn't realize mattered. The next morning, the paper ran Rachel's letter under the title. He heard what we couldn't. How a police dog found a voice trapped behind a wall. It went viral within 24 hours. And by the end of the week, 3 separate calls came into the Crestfield precinct. One from a woman in Georgia, another from a father in Oklahoma. The last came from a mother in Nebraska. Her daughter had vanished 8 months earlier. We thought she wandered off. But after I read that story, I remembered a man at the store helped us load our car. My daughter said he gave her a sticker. I didn't think anything of it until now. Rachel sat on the front steps of the station that evening, Titan lying at her feet. She looked out at the sun setting across the parking lot, casting soft gold across the pavement. She reached down and scratched behind Titan's ear. You didn't just save one little girl, she whispered. You opened the door for everyone else. Titan looked up at her with those sharp, loyal eyes. Guess we're not done yet, buddy. The courtroom looked too big for a little girl. 7-year-old Lila Carter sat at the witness stand in a navy blue jumper, her hair neatly braided, her feet swinging just above the ground. A stuffed animal, a tan beagle with one floppy ear, was clutched in her lap. She'd named it Detective Wolf. Next to her, on a small gray mat provided by the county, lay Titan, the golden brown German shepherd who had become her shadow. This wasn't the official trial yet, just a preliminary hearing to determine whether the case would proceed to federal court. But even without a jury, the room felt heavy. Cameras weren't allowed, but emotion was impossible to ban. Officer Rachel Monroe sat behind the prosecution table, arms crossed, hands tight beneath her sleeves. She'd testified dozens of times before, but this felt different. This wasn't about procedure or technicality. This was about a child finding her voice. The judge, a tall woman in her 60s with a calm presence and sharp eyes, looked over the bench. Lila, she said gently, you are very brave for being here today. Do you understand why you're here? Lila nodded slowly. And do you promise to tell the truth? Yes, ma'am. Her voice was soft, but it didn't shake. Titan didn't move. He stayed in perfect Sphinx position, alert but still. He'd been trained for this, certified in trauma support and courtroom presence, but he didn't need a command. From the first day he found her, it was like they spoke a language no one else understood. The assistant district attorney, Lillian Harris, stood to approach the stand. She was warm, professional, and deeply experienced in dealing with child witnesses. Hi, Lila. May I ask you a few questions? Lila nodded. Do you remember what store you were in that day? Harrison's Hardware, Lila said. It had balloons near the front, and the floors smelled like cleaning stuff. Lillian smiled. That's right. Do you remember who you were with? Lila hesitated. Then, the man in the red vest. Is he here today? Lila didn't look toward the defense table. She looked at Titan. He turned his head just slightly, ears twitching. Lila raised her hand and pointed across the courtroom. Everyone turned to look. Mason Doyle sat at the defense table, wearing a cheap tan suit, wrists cuffed under the table where the public couldn't see. His expression was blank, but Rachel saw his jaw tighten. That was enough to know. He felt the fear creeping in. Because this time his victim wasn't silent. Lillian took a breath and continued gently. Can you tell me what the man said to you when he brought you to the back of the store? Lila wrapped her fingers in Titan's fur. He said, if I made noise, no one would find me, and that I'd never see my mom again. The room went silent. Even the judge's pen stopped moving mid-note. And did you make noise? Lila shook her head. Why not? Because I believed him. Rachel clenched her jaw. The air in the courtroom felt like it had shifted, like even the walls were listening. Lillian's voice softened. But someone did find you, didn't they? Lila smiled for the first time that day. Titan did. A quiet cough came from the back. The courtroom clerk dabbed her eyes discreetly. Even the bailiff, who looked like he moonlighted as a bouncer, cleared his throat and looked away. Lillian gave a reassuring nod. Thank you, Lila. You did really well. She stepped back. Next came the defense attorney, a man named Leland Price, all polished charm and careful tone. He approached slowly. Hi there, Lila. I know these are hard questions, and you've been very brave. I just have a couple to ask, okay? Lila glanced at Rachel, who gave the smallest of nods. Okay, you mentioned a man in a red vest. Can you be sure it was the man sitting here today? Lila didn't even glance toward Doyle. She looked back at Titan. He's the one. I remember his eyes. His eyes? They didn't smile. Mom says people who smile for real, it's in their eyes too. His weren't. His were empty. The attorney paused, caught off guard. That wasn't something you could rehearse. That wasn't fiction. That was truth. He turned to the judge. No further questions. After a short recess, the judge returned with her decision. This court finds sufficient cause to proceed to federal trial. The charges shall be expanded to include multiple counts of child abduction, endangerment, and interstate criminal conspiracy. A murmur swept the room. Rachel exhaled deeply for the first time in what felt like hours. Across from her, Doyle remained stoic, but there was a shift in his posture. The predator had been cornered. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, their microphones and cameras waiting for something dramatic. They didn't get it. Lila was carried out the back exit in her mother's arms, a blanket draped around her, Titan following close behind like a loyal shadow. He didn't care about the flashing bulbs or the headlines. He only cared that the girl was safe. Later that evening, the precinct hosted a small ceremony. Nothing flashy, just the officers, a few city officials, and a table of store-bought cupcakes. It wasn't for the headlines. It was for Titan. The chief of police stepped forward holding a small black box. We don't normally issue commendations to four-legged officers, he said, but today we're making an exception. He opened the box to reveal a silver badge etched with K9 Titan Valor Unit. Everyone clapped. A few teared up. Titan, of course, just wagged his tail and trotted over to Rachel. She knelt down and clipped the badge to his harness. He always hears what others miss, someone whispered behind her. Rachel didn't turn around. She just whispered to Titan, "You earned this, buddy." That weekend, Rachel and Titan were invited to have dinner with Lila and her mom, Caroline, at their home on the edge of town. They ate spaghetti on paper plates and sat in the driveway afterward, watching fireflies under the warm Tennessee sky. Titan lay in the grass, belly up, tongue out. "I think he knows he's famous now," Carolyn laughed, scratching behind his ears. "He's milking it," Rachel replied. Lila leaned against her mom and looked up at Rachel. "Do you think I'll ever be that brave again?" Rachel leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Sweetheart, you already were." Though they left, Lila handed Rachel a folded drawing. On it was a sketch of a courtroom. A small girl stood at the witness stand. Titan was beside her. Across from them was a shadowy figure behind bars. At the top, in blue crayon, she'd written, "The dog who didn't let me be afraid." Rachel slid the drawing carefully into her jacket pocket. And as Titan climbed into the cruiser beside her, she looked at him and smiled. "Guess we've got more work to do." By the second week in the hospital, Lila Carter was brushing Titan's fur all by herself. She'd grown comfortable enough to hum when she worked, soft and tuneless, a quiet rhythm that matched the swish of the brush. Every afternoon, she sat on a padded playroom mat beside the giant German shepherd who had become her protector, her safe space, and according to the nurses, her therapy dog, even if unofficially. The hospital still didn't allow animals in patient wings, but for Titan, they made an exception. His badge now read K9 Titan, Special Visitor Pediatrics Unit. Officer Rachel Monroe arrived each morning before her patrol shift, sometimes in full uniform, sometimes in jeans and a faded Titan sweatshirt. The front desk staff didn't ask questions anymore. They knew the routine. Titan would trot ahead of her like he owned the place, tail swishing softly, ears alert. The moment he reached Lila's door, he'd wait until he heard her voice. "Come in, Titan." Then he'd nose the door open gently and walk in like a gentleman. Rachel always stayed back, giving them space. Because some healing doesn't need supervision, just presence. Lila had changed since the day Titan found her behind that storage shelf. She was still quiet, still guarded, but her voice no longer trembled when she spoke. Her eyes didn't dart around the room like she was expecting someone to grab her. She didn't flinch at footsteps. She didn't sleep with the light on. What she did do was draw dozens of pictures, all with Titan. Sometimes he wore a superhero cape. Sometimes he had wings. Once she drew him sitting on top of a tank, smiling like he commanded the entire U.S. Army. The pediatric floor's hallway walls were now covered with Titan art. One afternoon, Rachel arrived to find Lila sitting on her hospital bed with a new picture in her lap. She didn't say a word at first. She just handed it to Rachel. It was a sketch of a dim hallway. Boxes stacked high. A small child crouched in the corner, a speech bubble above her head reading, "Please don't leave me here." Standing between the boxes and the door was Titan. his eyes glowing, his body mid-run. Rachel studied it in silence. You remembered this, she said. Leela nodded. He came before the scary man came back. Rachel blinked. You thought he'd come back? Lila nodded again. He said he always comes back. At the precinct, the Joint Task Force meeting was already underway. FBI agents, state troopers, local PD. Everyone packed into a conference room with crime scene photos, maps, and thumbtacked evidence. Rachel entered late, the drawing still folded in her pocket. On the projection screen, Agent Reese pointed to a digital folder. We've confirmed the laptop recovered from Doyle's storage unit in Kansas City was his. His writing, his accounts, his searches. She clicked through tabs, maps, school calendars, videos, and files labeled with code names. This guy isn't a drifter, she said. He's strategic, controlled. He profiles small towns with low-security retail locations and weak surveillance coverage. Rachel muttered, and he targets kids who don't make a fuss. Exactly, Reese said. Lila fit his profile, but Titan ruined the plan. They pulled up one file labeled Crestfield, Tuesday morning woot. Inside, a detailed note. Target acquired. Good behavior. No noise. Ankle restraint worked. Return after close. Full extraction. Rachel clenched her fists. Return after close, she repeated. He was going to come back that night. But Titan got there first, Reese said. He wasn't just rescuing her, Rachel whispered. He was racing the clock. Later that day, Rachel took Titan back to the hospital. She didn't say anything to Lila about the briefing. Didn't mention the timing or how close she came to being gone forever. Some truths can wait. Instead, she knelt beside the bed. Hey, superstar, she smiled. Guess who got asked to speak at Career Day next month? Lila's eyes lit up. You? Rachel shook her head. Nope, him. Titan gave a small bark, head tilted. Lila giggled for the first time in days, a real one. Not just a polite smile, not just coping. Real joy. That night, Rachel sat on her front porch with Titan curled beside her. She had a cold beer in hand, but it stayed untouched. The stars were out. The town was quiet. I keep thinking about that growl, she said. Titan blinked slowly. You didn't bark. You didn't lunge. You growled, like you knew what was behind that door. He rolled onto his side, one paw lazily flopping over her boot. Where does that come from, huh? She asked. What is it you sense that we don't? Titan didn't answer, obviously, but he leaned closer, resting his head against her leg. That was his answer. The next morning, Rachel's phone buzzed. It was a message from Caroline Carter, Lila's mom. She had a nightmare last night. Screamed until she passed out. I couldn't calm her down. But Titan jumped up on the bed, curled around her like a wall. She stopped crying. Just like that. Fell asleep with her hand on his back. I just wanted to say thank you. Rachel didn't reply right away. She just stared at the screen. Sometimes trauma doesn't knock. It whispers. It waits. It grows in silence. And sometimes healing walks in on four legs. A few days later, Lila was discharged. The hospital held a quiet goodbye, just a nurse or two, the art therapist, and a hallway full of hand-drawn posters that read, Thank you, Titan. Caroline packed a duffel bag. Lila wore a pink hoodie 2 sizes too big and clutched Detective Wolf in one hand. Before they left, Lila turned to Rachel. I don't want to forget, she said. Rachel knelt down to her level. You won't, but I don't want it to hurt every time I remember. Rachel gently brushed the hair behind her ear. That part takes time, but one day you'll look back and realize how strong you were. Lila looked up. Because of Titan? Rachel smiled. No, because of you. The day after Lila went home, a package arrived at her new house. Inside was a navy blue backpack decorated with patches of stars and paw prints. Sewn into the front, he heard me, and tucked into the side pocket was a laminated badge with a picture of Titan, tongue out and the words, K9 partner, Lila Carter. When Lila saw it, she ran straight to Titan and hugged him so hard he let out a dramatic groan and flopped over. For the first time in a long time, everyone laughed. It started with a headline. The dog who heard what we didn't. A local story about a police dog who found a kidnapped girl behind a wall of boxes in a hardware store. It ran on page 1 of the Crestfield Chronicle on a quiet Tuesday morning. By Friday, it was on the national news. And by the following week, it had sparked something nobody expected. Calls started pouring in. At first, they came from nearby towns. People who had heard the story, seen the drawing Lila made of Titan, or read the excerpt Rachel had shared. One woman said she remembered seeing a man matching Doyle's description at her local toy aisle, pretending to restock shelves. Another father recalled a man with a red vest offering to help carry bags to his car near a school pickup zone. His daughter had mentioned him casually weeks before she disappeared. One woman from Iowa called in tears. "He helped us load our car," she said. "I didn't think anything of it until I saw that dog in the paper." At the Crestfield Police Department, the tip line was being managed 24/7. The FBI brought in 2 additional analysts. A task force was set up to connect potential sightings of Mason Doyle to unsolved child abduction cases. He was no longer listed as a local offender. He was now considered a serial predator. The dots began connecting faster than anyone could keep up with. 3 states, 5 confirmed aliases, 2 storage units filled with child-related items, hairbrushes, toys, candy, and printed maps marked with dates and notes. And 1 flash drive, encrypted but slowly being decrypted, contained an organized folder structure labeled by state and month. Back at home, Rachel sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by copies of reports, notes from the field, and transcripts of interviews with other families. Titan lay at her feet, chewing lazily on a tennis ball, unbothered by the swirl of chaos above him. "You're not just a dog," she whispered, reaching down to rub his neck. "You're a crack in the wall." Titan wagged his tail once, like he understood. Meanwhile, Lila was adjusting to life outside the hospital. Slowly. She didn't like loud noises. She avoided crowded spaces. She flinched at the sound of boots on hardwood. But she smiled more now. She laughed sometimes. And every night, Titan slept at the foot of her bed. He had his own pillow, his own blanket, and a little sign on her bedroom door that read, "Canine on duty, no monsters allowed." One afternoon, Rachel took Lila for a short walk behind the hospital grounds. It was the first time Lila had asked to go outside. They passed through a small garden planted by nurses and volunteers, sunflowers, lavender, tall grass that swayed with the wind. Titan walked beside her, head low, body relaxed. Lila didn't say much, but she held onto his harness the whole time. When they came back inside, a nurse whispered to Rachel, "That's the first time she's touched grass since she got here." Rachel swallowed hard. "She's braver than most grown-ups I know." The FBI confirmed it officially the next day. 2 additional cases, one in Arkansas, one in Oklahoma, had been linked to Doyle through surveillance footage and digital traces. One girl had been found months earlier, wandering along a riverbank, dazed and barefoot. The other child was still missing. But for the first time in over a year, the family had a lead. And it all started because of Titan. At the next task force meeting, Agent Reese pulled up a slideshow of recovered evidence from Doyle's laptop. The room was tense. "No violence," she said, "no blood, but deeply methodical behavior. He studies routines, finds weak spots. Then he blends in. Like a chameleon," someone muttered. Reese nodded. "And he doesn't rush. He takes weeks, sometimes months, to profile a location. Then he strikes." Rachel leaned forward. Titan threw that off. He interrupted the cycle. "Yes," Reese replied. And that interruption saved more than one child. It disrupted a system. At the end of the meeting, the chief passed out commendation forms, rare recognition awards for exceptional service. Rachel ignored hers. Instead, she submitted a single-page handwritten letter titled, "Request for Permanent Recognition, K9 Titan." She handed it to the chief without a word. He looked down, read the title, and said, "He earned it." Lila continued to draw. Dozens of sketches now covered the walls of her bedroom and the refrigerator at home. In every one, Titan stood between her and whatever scared her. A shadow, a monster, a broken door, a hallway, a cage. Titan was always there. In one picture, she drew him wearing a police badge around his neck and standing on a podium while children clapped below. At the top of the page, in uneven blue crayon, she wrote, "The hero with no words." One day, during a quiet moment on the front porch, Lila turned to Rachel and asked, "Do you think dogs can be superheroes?" Rachel smiled and looked at Titan, who was chasing a butterfly across the lawn. "They already are," she said. "They just don't wear capes." Meanwhile, the local school board, city council, and mayor's office all signed off on a motion to create something the town had never seen before. Canine Rex Appreciation Day, named after Titan's real-life inspiration from the case file, an official community event. There would be music, ice cream, a banner across Main Street, and a special presentation to honor Titan's service. The planning committee asked Rachel to speak. She declined the formal speech, but she agreed to tell a story. At the event, the town square was packed. Kids waved paw print flags. Vendors sold Titan t-shirts. A brass band played the national anthem, and someone brought a dog-shaped cake made of peanut butter and bacon. Lila stood next to Titan the entire time, holding his leash with one hand and her backpack in the other. When it was time for Rachel to speak, she walked to the podium and looked out at her neighbors, friends, and complete strangers who had shown up to celebrate a dog. She didn't read a speech. She just said this: "I thought I trained this dog. Turns out he trained me. He taught me to slow down, to listen, that you don't need words to say something important. Sometimes the ones who can't speak hear the most." He didn't just save Lila, he gave her back her voice. Afterward, Lila placed a flower crown around Titan's neck. He sat perfectly still for the ceremony, tongue lolling, tail sweeping the grass like a broom. Someone in the crowd yelled, "You're a good boy, Titan!" Titan barked once in approval, and the entire crowd cheered. The trial began without fanfare. No flashing cameras, no viral sound bites. Just a somber courthouse, a determined prosecution team, and a room full of people who understood the weight of what was happening. Mason Doyle, now facing multiple federal charges, sat behind the defense table in a tan suit, his wrists shackled beneath the surface. He barely moved. He didn't speak. He didn't look at anyone. But in front of him, a little girl sat straighter than any adult in the room. And beside her, a dog lay still as stone. Lila Carter had come a long way since the day she was pulled from the shadows of that hardware store closet. She no longer shook when strangers entered the room. Her words came a little easier, and her fear, while not gone, no longer held the wheel. She had found a way to live with it, with Titan beside her. This time, she didn't need a warm-up. No extra court therapy, no rehearsal. She walked to the witness stand and sat down with quiet purpose. Her stuffed dog, Detective Wolf, was in her lap. Titan lay on his mat just inches away. The judge, same woman from the preliminary hearing, gave her a warm smile. "You know the drill, don't you?" Lila nodded. "Do you promise to tell the truth?" "I do." Her voice was stronger now, still soft but steady. Titan didn't move. He didn't have to. His presence alone was enough. The assistant district attorney, Lillian Harris, approached with a smile. She'd prepared carefully, not just facts, but space. Space for a child to speak without pressure. "Lila, I know you've answered these before, but I'd like to go back to that day in the store. Can you tell me what you remember?" Lila looked ahead, eyes calm. "I was waiting for my mom, outside school. He said he worked at the store and needed help, that I could ride in his car for a minute." "And you believed him?" "I didn't know not to." The courtroom stayed silent. "Did he say anything once you were inside?" Lila looked down at Titan. "He told me if I made noise, no one would find me, that I'd disappear." "And did you?" She shook her head. "No, I was quiet, but Titan heard me anyway." Even Doyle flinched at that. A whisper ran through the room. The judge held up a hand for order. Lillian continued. "How did you feel when Titan showed up?" Lila smiled. "Safe. He didn't growl at me. He just knew I was there." "Has he stayed with you since?" "Every day." "And is he here today to help you feel brave?" "No," Lila said, her voice sure. "He's here because he never left." The defense attorney, still Leland Price, still neatly pressed, kept his questions short. "Lila, I want to ask you something that might be hard. Are you absolutely sure the man who brought you into that store is the man sitting here today?" Lila didn't hesitate. "Yes." "What makes you sure?" "His eyes." The attorney raised an eyebrow. "His eyes?" "They didn't smile. My mom says when people are kind, their eyes smile too. His never did." No further questions. When the trial ended, the jury needed less than a day. Guilty on all counts. The judge handed down a life sentence with no possibility of parole. She cited premeditation, digital evidence, and Lila's powerful testimony as the backbone of the conviction. But everyone in that courtroom knew. The real turning point had fur. That evening, the precinct held a retirement ceremony. Not for Rachel, not for the chief, but for Titan. He stood in the center of the department briefing room, tail wagging as an officer read off his service record. 7 years in K-9 unit, 16 arrests assisted, or missing children found, one life-defining moment that rewrote a town's understanding of hero. The chief handed Rachel a framed photo of Titan mid-action, captured by a news crew weeks earlier. Below it read, "He heard what others missed." Titan didn't understand the applause, the cupcakes, or the badge, but he did know one thing. When Rachel crouched down and said, "You did good, partner," he leaned in and licked her cheek. Just once, like a goodbye. Retirement didn't mean fading away. It meant a new mission. Rachel accepted an offer from a small trauma center in Kentucky that ran a pilot program pairing retired K-9s with children in recovery. They needed a face, an ambassador, for the work they were doing. Someone who didn't need words to heal. Titan was perfect. They visited schools, hospitals, libraries. At a middle school in Tennessee, a 13-year-old boy pulled Rachel aside after her talk. "I didn't tell anyone what happened to me," he said, eyes on the floor. "But I think I want to now." Rachel didn't say anything. She just rested his hand on Titan's head and let silence do the work. Back in Crestfield, Lila was thriving. She joined an art club, made new friends, started writing short stories. Her latest entry won first place in the local library's Young Authors Contest. The title? The Dog Who Listened First. It was a simple story. A girl trapped behind a wall, a dog who heard what no one else could, and a moment where everything changed. On the last day of summer, Rachel and Titan visited Lila's home. They sat out in the yard as the sun sank low and fireflies began to blink in the tall grass. Caroline brought out lemonade. Lila showed off a new drawing. It was of a courtroom again. This time, Titan stood behind a little girl holding a microphone. Across the room, the villain was small, almost cartoonish. The bars that held him were made of paper and light. At the top, she'd written, "The Dog Who Didn't Let Me Be Afraid." Rachel slipped the picture into her bag, same as she had the first one. There were no speeches that night, just fireflies and wind and peace. When they left, Lila ran to hug Titan one more time. As Rachel opened the cruiser door, Lila called out, "Wait!" She ran over and handed Rachel a small plastic envelope. Inside was a sticker, a cartoon version of Titan wearing a cape. Rachel laughed. "What's this for?" "So you don't forget." "I couldn't forget if I tried," Rachel said, her throat catching. Lila reached up and scratched Titan behind the ears. "You're my brave," she whispered. That night, back at home, Rachel opened her mailbox and found a handwritten letter with no return address. It read, "Your dog made me remember what I didn't say years ago. I told my mom, I hope someone listens this time." Rachel sat on her porch, holding the paper in one hand, Titan's leash in the other. Sometimes healing begins in silence. Sometimes it starts with a bark. Thank you for following the journey of Titan Lila and Officer Rachel Monroe. From fear to courage, from silence to strength, from being found to finding purpose. We hope their story reminded you of the power of instinct, loyalty, and love. Now we'd love to hear from you. Do you believe dogs can sense danger before humans can? Have you ever experienced something like that? Do you think every school or hospital should have a therapy dog like Titan? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Heroes for Animals, where real stories of loyalty, bravery, and healing are always just a paw print away.